Andrew, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh well, look, we've been connected for a while now, probably since you started Inspired, which we'll of course talk about.
Yeah, you're locked
But
up.
you've been correct. Yeah, cool.
You want to
Can
restart
you
it?
hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah, yeah. But it will do this if your internet's not 100%. It will just be a bit laggy.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
um, but yeah, Andrew, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Well, I'm so glad we're chatting because we've been connected for a while now. And my sort of journey into the space industry has, well, it basically restarted and got reignited when I started this podcast in 2020, at the end of 2020. But your love of space goes back a bit further, shall we say? So do you have a sort of space origin story, a moment where you looked up at the stars and had dreams of, one day perhaps visiting the cosmos? Do you remember? Was there a moment?
Oh, absolutely. Um, as a small child growing up in the '60s and watching the space race, the race to the moon, I remember having, hey, astronauts would be cool. But the moment, my aha moment, my origin moment, it was the Apollo 8 Christmas Eve broadcast from around the moon. That was the first time video images from the moon had been transmitted. And it was this blurry black and white image, and you barely could make anything out. But I remember being mesmerized by the image when my dad said, "Hey, that's the moon. They're live from the moon." And it just was that moment when it all turned on, when it all lit up, and I realized, "Hey, this is something I want to do." Growing up in the late '60s and then the early '70s, unfortunately, the requirements for astronauts back then where you had to have perfect vision and so forth, and I had glasses as a child, so I just kind of did what I could, wrote the astronauts a lot, got a lot of autographed pictures, and just followed the space program as best I could. Unfortunately, I became a teenager, and girls kind of took over for that. So I kind of foregoed that dream for a while. But once I got a chance to go work in Houston, I got to go visit the Johnson Space Center quite a bit, and that's when I decided that's what I wanted to do.
That's fantastic. So, and so you actually worked at NASA. That was your sort of,
Yes,
how
yep, that was.
was that sort of making it in your head, like as a sort of first haha moment? It was like, oh my God, I'm here where the Apollo era came from, and I guess the shuttle era was
Yeah,
upon us at that time.
yeah. Actually, I was working in Houston, and it was post Challenger. It was after the Challenger accident, and the when after the accident happened, because they weren't flying anymore shuttles for a while, a lot of the contractors had staffed down, so they had let a bunch of people go. Well, being a television engineer, we needed other engineers, and there were a couple guys who came over from the TV contract. And so I got to talk to them and find out what, I could actually do what I'm doing here, but do it for NASA. Oh my God, that's fantastic. And so once they decided to start flying shuttles again, they started staffing back up, and they connected me with the contractor out at Dryden Flight Research Center out at Edwards Air Force Base. And I got an interview and got the job. But I ended up taking my wife, who was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, and my 1.5-year-old son cross country in a rental truck to move in. And I don't know if back then still is, the high desert around the Edwards Air Force Base is a pretty pretty big desert. Let's put it that way. My wife was freaked out when we started driving through. She goes, "Is there any like stores or anything here?" She says, "Oh no, there's big cities and everything." We pulled into Palmdale and there was a McDonald's. She goes, "Oh, this is great. There's food here." So, but yeah, getting that first job working for as a NASA contractor was just an eye opener. And the thing is about working for NASA, especially in that particular case, our contract was to provide television support for the shuttle landings. So we were involved with a lot of the operations with the convoy and so forth, and I ended up doing 3 years there, and that was. I still have to pinch myself sometimes when I think back, spending all that time, because once the shuttle landed, we were part of the TV convoy that come up, and so when you see video from underneath the shuttle back in the late '80s, that was my camera that was shooting that stuff. And then we would stay there for up to 8 hours afterwards doing tile survey until the shuttle was ready. They were ready to tow the shuttle back in to the main hangar. And so we were there for hours and hours. I actually had a couple occasions, it's probably okay to tell the story now, a couple occasions where the closeout crew allowed us to climb into the orbiters. So I got to climb through Columbia and Discovery. And it's amazing how small they look. I mean, they look pretty small on camera, but when you get in there, it's like phone booths. It's like 3 or 4 phone booths, not a lot of room. It's a good thing they're in space because they could float around. Otherwise, you would never get any work done because you just be bumping into people. So, but yeah, so the Dryden was a real experience for 3 years. And then the contractor I was working for lost that contract, but it picked up the contract in Houston, which is where I was from. So they moved me back to Houston, and I was working at the Johnson Space Center for 10 years from 1990 to 2000. And it was a playground for me there. On top of being able to be a television engineer and do all the things that I do normally for work, I did it around astronauts, around spacecraft mock-ups and so forth. I flew 0G on the microgravity research aircraft for a couple of years. I scuba dived at the old WEDF and then at the NBL for quite a bit of those years. What else? Got to travel quite a bit. We were documenting the construction of the International Space Station. So we ended up going to Russia 3 times, went to Tokyo once, and just about everything else. I mean, just being around that environment, around the astronaut office, making friends with several astronauts. And at one point, we were training astronauts to use the new high definition television cameras that are coming out in the mid 90s. They had several flights where they took the cameras up to shoot high definition video. And as part of the TV contract, we were able to train the astronauts. So I got to make friendships with Don Thomas and Katie Coleman and several of there. It's just so much memories trying to remember everything, but it was just a real gas. And to be part of that and be part of the history of the space program. And now, 20 something odd years later, after my departure in 2000, I wish I hadn't had to leave, but it was contracting. It was a NASA contract position, and money comes and goes. They essentially ran out of money for my position. So, but I was able to move on, at least stay in the high tech part of television. I ended up working for Mark Cuban and started the first all high definition television network in 2000. And then 2005, I left to work for a company called the NEP Group, who I'm still with now. But I travel 240 days a year. That's part of my job for the last 25 years, is traveling everywhere and anywhere they need to do television. Have done like the Olympics down in South America. Actually, I've done 4 Olympics: Atlanta, Salt Lake, Vancouver, and Brazil. So it's been a really interesting ride this whole life, and the real thing that it caused me to rethink I want to get back into space was the Inspiration 4 mission. That's when it became a reality. I mean, everybody talked about space tourism for so long, but always billionaires going to the Mir space station, that kind of thing. But the Inspiration 4 announcement was a real eye opener for a lot of us. I'm sure you saw it too. And that's when things started to come into focus for me. I was 59 when that happened, and I realized if I was ever going to fulfill my dream of spaceflight, that I needed to get on it. I've only got maybe 10, 15 years of time left. I don't say viability, but I like to think I'm going to stay active into my 70s. So I had to start getting into it and just connecting with other space positive people like yourself. Especially with the group that we met at the Inspiration 4 mission. That was a real turning point for us, or for myself. And it's just amazing the people I've met along the way. The group, the Inspired 24, of course, we started, was founded by basically 24 of us that were there at the Inspiration 4 mission. And I got to tell this story. So we're eating dinner the night before at a little seafood restaurant at the Cape. And we're all learning more about each other, talking to each other. And at one point, the music, it was an outdoor dining, so the music was playing pretty loud, and you're having to yell across the table and so forth. Well, the music kind of died down kind of unnaturally. And I started saying something, at a higher volume. But of course, as the music died down, it became a scream at that point. So I said, somebody at this table is going to go to space. And everybody kind of looked at me and they didn't laugh, but they were like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, within a year, one of our founding members, Ruben Salinas, had been selected by Space Plus, which is a division of Uplift Aerospace, to fly on a future New Shepard mission. And so that was a real proud moment to think about, that group of people, being around that kind of group of people who are interested in flying in space, that energy was real, and it's helped, reinforce everything I do, that helping other people try to fulfill their dream of space is also just as fulfilling as fulfilling it for myself. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, trying to help others. And of course, we had our second one just selected recently by Moon Dow. Iman Jahir was selected to be their Moon Dow's astronaut to fly on a future New Shepard flight.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's so much I could touch on there, and I love your story. I love the, that your sort of your original space origin story was looking at that Apollo footage, and then, wanting to get into the sort of technical, being behind the camera. It's sort of come full circle, really, which I think is really powerful. Yeah, lots of stuff I could talk about there, but the Inspired 24 group, that's where I first met yourself, through Twitter, now X. How let's talk more about the role of Inspired 24 in promoting the democratization of space, because the quote unquote ordinary people do not go to space, and there have been these sort of competitions and sort of sweepstakes through crypto companies to enable access. But what has Inspired been doing to promote the word of space and inspire ordinary people to believe that there's a path for them?
Well, that's a great question. Inspire 24 was basically, like I said, is a group of us who just said, we're all interested in space. This is something we want to do. It wasn't anything tangible at the time that you could say, well, this is a reason we need to join this group. But it was just that we connected so well. So we started to keep communicating. And then all of a sudden we were having conference calls every month. And then, hey, why don't we start a club? And then we started realizing, we do have amongst us the energy for going to space. And what you mentioned is average people going to space. Well, before the average person can go to space, they have to want to go to space. You don't just grab somebody off the street who has no clue and throw them in a capsule and send them to space. They have to have the want, the dream, the drive to do that. And so that's what really the Inspire 24 is, a group of those people, the want, the need, the drive. And they come from all walks of life, all over the world. We have, like yourself in the UK, we've got people in Europe, we get people in Africa, South Asia, all over the United States, South America. And the simple fact is the club doesn't, I'll say it's club, the group doesn't charge, because right now all we're doing is helping people connect. I've had several people within the group who have had dreams of working in the space industry, who've been able to get jobs in it. Brooke Edwards, who's an early member, she's now a reporter for Florida Today, which is her dream job. Everybody has a different talent set, or a group of talents to allow them to do what they want to do. But the idea is to try to find how we can take those talents and focus them toward their dream of spaceflight. And some people I've talked to, part of this group, they'd love to go to space one day, but they're not at that point in their lives where they would want to endeavor on those kind of competitions, like you said. There are the competitions where it's a blind drawing. Some of them are, you have to do a campaign, you have to do some do videos. It's almost like a social media thing, but it's all different ways to get to that, fulfill that dream. And I mean, I encourage everybody in the group to apply for everything from actual space flight opportunities down to things like NASA's solar system ambassadors. That's something that happens pretty regularly. It's kind of a social media position, and several members have joined and been accepted. And so sometimes it's the little things to keep people interested. We're a 501c3, but we haven't really got our funding up yet. So that's something we're planning on in the future, and those kind of things we want to eventually provide scholarships to do things like space camp and zero-G flights. And if the opportunity arises, we can afford to. We'd start sending people up on suborbital flights and so forth.
That's so cool. Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a potential path to space via Worldview's atmospheric balloon. Um,
Yes.
tell me about that, because I've had Jane Pointer on the podcast before, and I think they're really onto something with that very accessible potential transportation, where basically you go up rather than shoot up on a rocket at Mach 2 or whatever it is. You're sort of a slow ascent over a period of hours. It sounds a lot more, you could have a cup of tea or a glass of prosecco and enjoy the experience. Is that your dream as it currently
Well,
stands? Is that your path to
that
space?
yes, yes, it is. I want to say it's my backup plan. I still want to go to space, but should the opportunity not arise, getting to go to 100,000 feet into the stratosphere is pretty amazing. Yes, it's a gentle balloon ride. It's about a 6 to 8 hour ride, an hour up for 2 to 4 hours at altitude, and then come back down, and then you actually land on a parachute rather than the balloon. And there, of course, there's many companies that are popping up all over them. I just got another company based out of Spain, I believe is going to be doing it also. So it seems to be a viable option for commercial space for tourism. Yes, I got involved with it about 2 years ago, and as part of that, signing up for that, we were able to actually to bring in 20 something members of I-24 to join that. So we're going to be flying as teams. And one of the things is, when you look at the advertising for not only Worldview and the other companies, a lot of times the promotion is kind of based around refined flight, comfort, champagne, caviar, that kind of thing. And we've been joking with the Worldview folks that we're probably going to be the beer and pretzels group, because we don't care about the champagne and caviar. We want to actually do science. I've actually been working with several members of the group looking at doing some high altitude photography. Also, I have an opportunity to do a ham radio connection with the International Space Station while we're at altitude. That's something we're working on. And there's certain kinds of science that can be done aboard a balloon at 100,000 feet, and we're still looking around trying to find additional partners for that. But it's got to be an adventure. It's really about the overview effect. That's what it comes down to. At that altitude, you're above 99% of the atmosphere. You see the curvature there. If you see space as it is, you don't see it as the blue. It's the inky black. You can see stars. So it's short of making that orbital flight or suborbital flight. The Worldview balloon is definitely worth the effort. Like I said, it's a big enough deal that we've signed a whole bunch of other I-24 members. And we look forward to doing it as a group, because it's a lot more fun doing it as a group as opposed to just by yourself. In fact, a couple of years ago, as when Space Plus had their program going, trying to select their astronaut, they did a zero-G flight, and I got invited along. And we had to fly with Dr. Sion Proctor, too. She was doing some art on her flight. And getting to fly zero-G with people people you like, is a way more fun. And so by extension, flying to the stratosphere or even flying to space has got to be a lot more fulfilling when you're flying with people and are friends with. So that's my plan. I hope to do as much of this as a group as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because it's, in the traditional astronaut path, you'd obviously train together as a crew for many months, a couple of years for a specific mission. And the reality of being in space is you are confined into a tiny amount of space. So I completely agree. I think, as space tourism becomes a reality, either getting together and being with friends, or at least building that interpersonal relationship with your crew as much as possible, is only going to enhance the experience.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
I think is really cool. You mentioned the overview effects. That's something I talk about a lot on the podcast. I had the honor of having Frank White on a couple of episodes ago. How does your work with the Inspired 24 contribute to experiencing the overview effect? Or, what do you, because obviously, as you said, we've got the second member who's going to be going to space. How important is physically going to space and then communicating the overview effect with the group and then elsewhere as well?
Oh yeah, well, you think about what the overview effect is. They talk about it. Frank talked about it. Many people have talked about it, especially astronauts that have flown. They talk about it being a fundamental change in the way you think about your planet, and not only just your planet, but yourself. Everything around you changes, and it's a broadening of your vision. It's a loss of ego. People have talked about they lost their ego, and it's great that we're having these opportunities because this is a time in the world where everybody, as many people as possible, need to have a broader view of the planet. We've got to save our planet. We can't continue what we're doing. And this, I think, is one of the best ways to do it, because if you get people to go fly, whether it's on a balloon to a stratosphere at 100,000 feet or suborbital or even orbital, you come back and you tell that story and you help inspire other people to go, you know what? That's a great idea. Either to experience the overview effect themselves and then come back and tell their stories, or to try to influence the politicians and the industry of the world that, hey, we need to take care of this planet. And I think over time you're going to see way more people adopt this idea and accept it as the new norm, which I'm very, very pleased to think about in the future, because my kids and I have grandkids now. I want a planet where they can be healthy. And so this is the one thing I see in the larger picture of my life where I can help contribute to the planet, is trying to promote the overview effect. I mean, it's one of the things I think about. I've actually had something that goes to this is I've had a couple of recurring dreams in my life, and they're all about spaceflight. But they're very, very, very specific to that. When they're both of them occur when I'm doing a spacewalk. I'm in a spacesuit and so forth. And I've been in a couple in my NASA career, and then since then doing some of the chase training in Tucson, where you get to put on a pressure suit and so forth. But on both these dreams, I'm doing a spacewalk, and I'm like, hand over fist, or I'm working on something, and then something tells me to look, and I look up, and it's the panorama of the planet, and it really affected me. Even my dreams, I realized this is a big deal. And now they shot some virtual reality imagery from the space station a couple of years ago, and it's available through using VR. And I've watched that, and it brings a tear to my eye. Every time I watch it, I tear up, because it's just an amazing experience. I suggest anybody who has a chance to view that footage to do so. And that's actually one of the extensions that Ruben Salinas, one of our members, who's going to be flying in the future, he's doing a lot of work with that. He's actually come up with a what do you call it? A plan for doing experiments wearing sensors to measure the awe effect, which is what happens when you experience the overview effect. It's where it's a change in your way you think. So he's got plans for doing that for his flight, and we're going to try to do that when we fly our worldview flights to help measure that and get the tangible scientific evidence about it.
That's very interesting. It's a very subjective thing, the overview effect, but it's very interesting, and the whole loss of ego is something that I hadn't really thought about before. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, so I hope you don't mind. So with your technical expertise behind the camera, say there was a opportunity to go to space where it was, what piece of content could you make which is going to maximize the overview effect and inspire the most amount of people in the world? So would that be a shot back on Earth? Would it be on the moon? Where would you point your camera in this sort of theoretical exercise to inspire the most amount of people?
Well, once I stop crying for being in space, because I know if I ever get up there, it's not going to be a dry eye in the house. I think looking back to Earth, whether it's in low Earth orbit or on the moon, I think the moon is the next place where pointing cameras back at the Earth is going to make a big deal. There have been a lot of still imagery from the Apollo missions looking back on the Earth. There's even been some, if I remember correctly, the Japanese had a satellite that flew around the moon with high definition television cameras, and they just imaged the moon with high definition television cameras. And there were several shots with the Earth. But I think also the Artemis 1 flight, I don't know if you saw all the stills that they brought back. when some of the
Yeah.
footage they shot with the moon and the Earth, and it was just, I mean, if that doesn't tell you we're an island in a vast ocean, I don't know what does. But yeah, that's a tough one. Trying to get that just a visual image is as many point of views as I can get.
Yeah, because I remember Elon Musk before he founded SpaceX, he wanted to fund a mission to Mars to send a sort of mini greenhouse and land it
Hmm.
on Mars. So that sort of imagery of something very living against the, I guess, the red dust of
Yeah,
just, it's that sort of, it sort of combines, like, the physical engineering challenges of getting somewhere, but then getting something like that which would just, hopefully just blow everyone's minds and,
yeah.
help point humanity in the direction of exploration.
I think that's
I'm quite,
still a good goal.
yeah, I bet. I'm just because I'm fascinated by your career, and you're so active on the Inspires group. I mean, I've never been part of a group where, someone responds so quickly. It's seemingly like any time of day. How do you how do you balance your personal life, your professional life, traveling 240 days out the year, and your various, space passions? Do you have any tips on sort of, time management?
Well, to be totally honest, because it's mostly because my kids are all grown up and have their own kids. So when I'm home,
Yeah.
part of traveling 240 days a year is that you're home 100 and something other days. And my wife works, and on the weekdays, if I do my laundry, do the dishes, and then I've got all the free time in the world. I volunteer at Space Center Houston, which is what was one of the first things I did after getting. Actually, I applied before the Inspiration 4 mission. I was accepted, and this was all just, at the tail end of COVID. So there was the number of people that visited Space Center Houston was way down. So I got back in there, and the crowds were, a couple hundred a day. Well, now that's in, weekdays, it's not even counting the school kids. They'll get 1,000 school kids a day. They've still got, we're
Mm.
getting at least 1,000 a day or more, and that it's great to see the people showing up and asking questions. And that's actually one of the best things about being a volunteer there, is that you get to feel their energy, especially the kids. But it's every age, all over the world. They're getting so many visitors now. I spend most of my time out at Rocket Park with the Saturn V rocket that's there. It's the last fully flight certified Saturn V rocket. So there's a lot to talk about. And I don't know if you've ever seen images of it or if you've ever been there. The Saturn V is laying on its side, and it's in a building, but there's a railing around it to keep people from going, obviously, to touching it. But they let us as volunteers get on the other side of the railing, so I can stand with my back to the rocket and I can talk to people and just kind of like free form, conversations. I give them some facts about the rocket, and then they start asking me questions. And the thing is, I'll talk about anything about space. I even had a conversation with about an 8-year-old about black holes the other day. About he read an article about how they think black holes are actually the beginning of another universe. It sparks another big bang, and that's been one of the theories I've been living on ever since it was suggested. I don't know how long ago it was, but I remember that's a little spark in there going, holy moly! You realize that every time there's a black hole created, when a star collapses and a black hole is created, a whole other universe gets created. How, if that's not mind blowing, I don't know what is. And the fact is, we're in a universe that was created by another Big Bang, by Big Bang, probably a black hole and another reality that was created. I mean, it goes on. But yeah, you get to hang out with some people and open their eyes. And some of the most fun is actually some of the older people, kind of my age and older, who remember the Apollo days, who come out and tell their stories, and they've got their kids. I got to tell this one story. So a couple Christmases ago, I was working, and this gentleman, big, heavy-set guy, wearing big suspenders, and he's kind of running up, and he runs up about halfway between the first and second stage. You can see all the engines and the plumbing. It's all very intricate. And the guy comes up and says, and he's got family members coming up. He says, "See, I told you they had plumbers at NASA." And he's a plumber. He was a plumber his whole life. And I said, yes, actually, NASA had plumbers and electricians and all kinds of people. It took, tradespeople to build these rockets. The average everyday tradespeople to build these rockets. And was so heartening to see him enjoying to express his joy about the space ride, his memory of the space ride with his kids and his grandkids. And we talked for probably half an hour. answering questions, and it's just one of the best parts about doing it.
That's fantastic. Well, look, it's been so great to chat. I know I'll speak to you again in the future on the podcast. I'm approaching the 100th episode
Oh, great.
in 2 years, which is exciting. I've got a big guest for episode 100, which I won't mention just yet until they definitely confirm the time.
Okay.
But let's before you go, let's take your predictions for the space tourism industry, because obviously a lot of stuff you've done and are doing is sort of, you know, promoting space through space tourism. I think that's fair to say. Where do you think it's going to go? You know, how many people do you think we're going to see go to space in the next, let's say, 10 years?
Oh,
And
wow.
not just
Well,
not just the companies now, but you know, what companies are
yeah.
coming and how many people are going to go and look down on the Earth?
Well, it's oof. I can just throw a number out there. I hope it'll be in the thousands, but if you're counting like the rockets and the worldview light balloons to the stratosphere, it could very well be in the next 10 years 1,000. But it's in the very short term here. We know New Shepard's going to be coming back to fly people. They had an anomaly a year or so ago, and so they're getting back into the crewed flights. So that'll help with the cadence. So you're talking about 6 people per, maybe 6 flights a year, 7 flights a year. Virgin Galactic is going through, and they're kind of suspending flights until they develop their Delta vehicle, which is a much larger vehicle, much more capable vehicle. I was just on a call the other day where they talked about how the new Delta vehicle actually may be able to go higher. They're increasing the flight envelope for it, so it'll become a little more interesting for people. So yeah, I hope it'll be in the thousands, and hopefully there are other companies that will see, hey, there's some money to be made doing this, and they'll jump in the bandwagon and start flying people to space. I'm surprised SpaceX hasn't done something, but of course they've kind of got the market cornered on the orbital flights, which you never know what else is coming down. There's always some billionaire out there who wants to help promote the overview effect, and you know, like Jared Isaacman, what he did with I-4, and now with the Polaris missions, Polaris Dawn, should be flying sometime this summer. They're going to do the first commercial EVA, which I think is fantastic. In fact, I haven't officially announced this yet, but we'll break it here on your podcast. We're planning, the I-24 is planning a group meetup for the Polaris Dawn mission. We just don't know when yet. As soon as we know when, we'll start promoting it. So we try to get as many people to visit as far as we can. Yeah, so okay, I'm going to say 1,000, but who knows? But yeah, we'll see. It's hopefully people will see the opportunities for making the money, which is what really has to happen. You got to be able to make money doing it, and then people will jump on the bandwagon.
Exactly, it's got to make money, and it's got to be not at the detriment of Earth. Obviously, the benefits
Yes.
have got to be demonstrated back on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, people like yourself help communicate. Well, look, it's been so great to chat, and I will, if I can, God willing, I will definitely be at the meetup for the Polaris mission. And
Excellent.
thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Ben.